On October 21, 2024, a quiet suburban neighborhood in Lake Alice, Washington, was shattered by an unimaginable tragedy. In the dead of night, 5 members of the Humiston family, Mark, Sarah, and their 3 children, were brutally murdered. Their lives, once filled with promise and love, were cut short in a matter of moments. But what if the truth was even darker than anyone could have imagined? A 15-year-old boy, the family's own son, stood at the center of it all. Was he the killer? Or was there something else at play in that darkened house? What truly happened that night in Lake Alice? Stay with us as we unravel the haunting story of the Lakefront family massacre. Lake Alice, Washington, a quiet, picturesque community nestled in the foothills, where life typically follows a peaceful rhythm. Mark Humiston, 43, an accomplished electrical engineer at Hargis Engineers in Seattle, and his wife Sarah, 42, a former registered nurse, lived in a stunning lakefront home with their 5 children. To the outside world, the Humiston family seemed like the embodiment of the American dream, a close-knit family living under the care of 2 devoted parents. They were known for their deep religious beliefs and a lifestyle marked by strict control over every aspect of their children's lives. The Humistons believed in homeschooling their children, keeping them away from the distractions of the world outside, fostering a life where discipline and religious values were paramount. The family kept to themselves, rarely seen outside their circle. Their home by the lake, far from the distractions of city life, seemed like the perfect place for a tight-knit, religious family to thrive. But on October 21, 2024, that peaceful existence would come to a violent, shocking end. In the early hours of the morning, tragedy struck when 5 members of the Humiston family were found dead in their home. The scene was unimaginable, and the sole survivor, a young girl, just 11 years old, would later reveal that the horrors began when her older brother made a chilling phone call to 911. But what led to this brutal massacre? And who was really responsible for the deaths of Mark, Sarah, and their children? Before we continue, please take a moment to subscribe to this channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the full story of the Lakefront family massacre. This case has more twists than you could imagine, and it's a tragedy that still raises so many questions. It was 2:30 a.m. on October 21, 2024, when a phone call shattered the tranquility of Lake Alice, Washington, a quiet town where nothing ever seemed out of place. The voice on the other end of the line was frantic, a 15-year-old boy claiming that his 13-year-old brother, Benjamin, had killed their entire family and then turned the weapon on himself. Mark and Sarah Humiston, both in their 40s, had been murdered along with their 3 children, Benjamin, 13, Joshua, 9, and Catherine, just 7 years old. The chilling words sent deputies rushing to the lakefront home, a place that had always appeared to be filled with peace and love. But when they arrived at the scene, the situation was far more complicated than it seemed. The 15-year-old, who had made the initial 911 call, wasn't the only one to offer a disturbing account. Just moments later, a second 911 call came in, from a neighbor. The family's 11-year-old daughter, BAH, had appeared at their doorstep, bloodied, in shock, and covered in gunshot wounds. She claimed that her brother had killed the whole family, but there was one key detail that made everything more terrifying: BAH had survived by playing dead and escaping through the window of her bedroom. The question was, how did she manage to survive when the others didn't? And why would Benjamin, whom the 15-year-old had named as the murderer, take his own life after killing his family? As the police began to piece together the details of the crime, the questions mounted. Was the story true, or was there something else going on behind the scenes? When the deputies arrived, the gruesome scene they found in the Humiston family home confirmed the unimaginable: 5 bodies, Mark, Sarah, Benjamin, Joshua, and Catherine, were all dead. The house, which had once been a place of warmth and love, was now eerily quiet, with only the chilling remnants of what had transpired in the dead of night. But there was one survivor, BAH, the young girl whose words would soon become crucial in understanding what happened. And yet, even with this new evidence, the case didn't add up. The 15-year-old's story seemed to align with the forensic evidence, but BAH's claims cast doubt on the details. Who had really committed the crime? Was it Benjamin, as his brother suggested, or was it someone else? With each passing moment, the investigation unraveled a deeper web of confusion, suspicion, and fear. As detectives dug deeper into the family's past, they uncovered troubling details about the household's strict, controlled environment and the tension that may have been building for months. So, what really happened that night? Was it a tragic act of violence fueled by a troubled family dynamic, or was there something darker and more sinister at play? The authorities had a suspect in mind, but nothing was certain, and the truth was far from clear. And for the family's community, the horror of what had happened was just beginning to sink in. The investigation began immediately, but nothing about the crime scene made sense. The house, though seemingly untouched in some ways, was full of disturbing inconsistencies. Authorities quickly began combing through the scene, taking photographs, gathering evidence. But as they reviewed the details, something felt off. Prosecutors would later claim that certain items appeared to have been moved or tampered with, such as a missing bottle of Clorox wipes and the backpacks belonging to the young victims. They suggested that these items were not where they should have been. Some were found opened, as though someone had rifled through them. Yet, the defense team was quick to dismiss these allegations, calling them false and defamatory, accusing the prosecution of intentionally distorting the facts to taint the suspect's right to a fair trial. The battle for truth had begun, but it was far from clear what had really happened at the scene. Was the crime scene truly disturbed after the fact, or was the prosecution simply grasping for something to explain the horror that unfolded inside the Humiston home? The defense argued that the inconsistencies could have been caused by the chaos that followed the tragedy, with law enforcement and others entering the scene in the wake of the murders. The story was murky, and the lines between truth and manipulation were already starting to blur. But even beyond the crime scene itself, investigators were starting to uncover details that suggested this wasn't the first shock to hit the Humiston family. Detectives began piecing together fragments of the family's history. Tensions, arguments, and a strict, almost authoritarian household dynamic that many who knew the family found unsettling. Mark and Sarah Humiston were not just your typical parents. They were known for their unwavering religious beliefs and their controlled, protective approach to parenting. Their children were homeschooled and kept away from outside influences. They rarely socialized with other families, and the parents tightly regulated their interactions with the outside world. As the investigation deepened, it emerged that the 15-year-old suspect had recently been reprimanded by his parents for failing several important school tests. Was this the tipping point? The trigger that sent the teenager into a spiral of rage and ultimately led to the massacre? Authorities weren't sure, but they had a hunch. There were whispers among the family's acquaintances that the relationship between the teenager and his parents had been strained for months, possibly longer. Could this harsh reprimand, along with the constant pressure to succeed, have caused the boy to lash out in a way no one saw coming? And then there was BAH. How had she survived? How had she managed to escape the horrific violence that claimed the lives of her siblings and parents? Her account seemed inconsistent with the evidence. Was she truly the innocent victim, or had she been complicit in the tragedy? The more investigators dug into the family's background, the more questions emerged. Could someone in the family have been hiding a deeper secret? The shockwaves of the crime reverberated through the tight-knit community of Falls City, Washington, as friends, neighbors, and co-workers tried to come to terms with what had happened. Mark Humiston, known for his work as an electrical engineer at Hargis Engineers in Seattle, was respected in his professional circles. Sarah, though her nursing license had expired, was still an active member of the community and had a reputation for being a loving and caring mother. How could such a respected family fall apart in this way? As the forensic evidence continued to pour in, the picture began to grow murkier. Authorities weren't sure what had triggered the violence that night, but they knew one thing for sure: someone was responsible. The family's seemingly perfect life was shattered, and now the world was waiting for answers. Who could commit such a horrifying act? And who, or what, was behind it all? As the investigation into the Lakefront family massacre unfolded, the defense team, led by attorney Kristen Gestott, quickly began to challenge the state's narrative. Their strategy was clear: cast doubt on the prosecution's claims and present a theory of their own. According to the defense, the 15-year-old suspect, who had called 911 to report the deaths, might not have been involved in the killings at all. In fact, they argued, his statement on that 911 call was consistent with the evidence that had been gathered at the scene. The defense team focused on a crucial detail: the absence of blood on the 15-year-old suspect when law enforcement arrived at the scene. They pointed out that, given the brutal nature of the killings, it was highly unlikely that anyone involved in such a violent act could have escaped without getting blood on themselves. If the teenager had been directly involved in the murders, they argued, he should have been covered in blood, especially considering the close proximity of the crime and the chaotic nature of the attack. Instead, the defense proposed an alternative theory that would later become a focal point of the case: what if Benjamin, the 13-year-old brother, was the real killer? They suggested that the younger boy might have been responsible for the deaths of their parents and siblings, and that the 15-year-old had been trying to protect him or cover up the crime. It was a theory that immediately raised eyebrows and added complexity to an already bewildering case. But the defense's argument didn't end there. They also pointed to BAH's testimony, which had cast suspicion on her brother, claiming he was the one who had carried out the murders. Was it possible, they wondered, that the entire situation had been misunderstood? Was there a cover-up that had gone horribly wrong? The defense team was careful not to point fingers at BAH directly, but they questioned the consistency of her account, suggesting that the trauma she had suffered could have led her to misidentify the perpetrator, or worse, that she had been a part of it all along. This theory posed even more questions. If Benjamin had been the one responsible for the killings, why was he not covered in blood? Did the teenager, the 15-year-old suspect, possibly play a more passive role in the events? Or, as the defense suggested, was he simply caught in the aftermath of a horrific tragedy, perhaps unwilling or unable to stop his younger brother from carrying out the brutal act? In an attempt to bolster their position, the defense team carefully examined the crime scene itself, focusing on the forensic evidence. They argued that no one involved in the shootings would have been able to escape without substantial amounts of blood on them, which raised doubts about the 15-year-old's involvement in the murders. They suggested that the crime scene had been tampered with certain items moved or disturbed after the fact. The missing bottle of Clorox wipes and the rearranged backpacks seemed like insignificant details, but the defense pointed to these items as signs of potential interference by authorities or others, questioning whether the scene had been mishandled. Despite the growing doubts cast by the defense, the prosecution stood firm in its belief that the 15-year-old was indeed responsible for the massacre. But with each new revelation and twist in the case, the lines between the truth and the possible cover-up blurred further. Theories were presented, but none of them seemed to explain everything that had happened that fateful night in Lake Alice. With the teenager now facing 5 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted murder, the case was far from over. And as each day passed, more details emerged, some that deepened the mystery, others that sparked more questions than answers. The defense wasn't backing down, and neither was the prosecution. As the legal battle intensified, the public, and the community, were left to wonder, who was truly responsible for the senseless deaths of Mark, Sarah, and their children. As the case moved toward trial, the growing tension was palpable. Would the truth ever be uncovered? Was the 15-year-old suspect guilty, or was he simply a pawn in a much darker and more complicated story? Mark and Sarah Humiston were pillars of their community, known for their devout religious beliefs and a lifestyle marked by rigid structure and control. From the outside, they appeared to have the perfect family, hardworking parents, well-behaved children, and a picture-perfect home by the lake. But as the investigation into the lakefront family massacre progressed, it became clear that behind the walls of that seemingly idyllic house, tensions were brewing. Mark, an electrical engineer, and Sarah, a former nurse, were deeply involved in their children's lives. They homeschooled their 5 kids, including their teenage son, the 15-year-old suspect, and his younger siblings. Homeschooling, a practice often chosen by families for its flexibility and ability to cater to individual needs, was the Humistons' way of maintaining control over every aspect of their children's upbringing. They dictated everything: what their children could read, who they could be friends with, even how they spent their free time. For the younger children, this strict regimen may have felt normal, but for a teenager, the lack of independence and personal space could have been suffocating. The 15-year-old, like many teenagers, was beginning to question authority, especially the authority of his parents. And like many teenagers in high-stress environments, he found himself struggling. He had been falling behind in school, failing tests, and the pressure was mounting. His parents, concerned about his academic performance, reprimanded him, which only deepened the frustration and sense of helplessness he felt. But what if that punishment, those failures, were the catalyst for something darker? Imagine being a 15-year-old in a home where every part of your life is controlled. Your every move is scrutinized. Your friends are chosen for you. Your failures are magnified, and your every mistake is met with disappointment. In such a high-pressure environment, it's not hard to imagine the emotional and psychological strain this young person may have been under. The rebellion that naturally comes with adolescence, combined with the stifling nature of a tightly controlled household, could easily create a powder keg waiting to explode. Psychologists often describe the teenage years as a time of identity formation, when kids begin to develop their own sense of self, separate from their parents. But what happens when that process is stifled? When the freedom to make mistakes, learn from them, and grow is taken away? It's possible that the constant control and lack of personal autonomy created a volatile mix of resentment, confusion, and isolation for the 15-year-old suspect. At the same time, Mark and Sarah's strict religious and moral framework may have also played a role in shaping their children's worldviews. The Humistons' religious beliefs were foundational to their family life, and the family's devotion was evident in the way they lived. But for some, the constant pressure to adhere to such an uncompromising system can create feelings of guilt and fear. If the teenager had been feeling isolated or unable to meet the high expectations set by his parents, could this have pushed him to a breaking point? In addition, the family's controlled environment meant that there was little opportunity for the children to form bonds outside of the family unit. For a teenager, the lack of socialization with peers can lead to feelings of loneliness and alienation. As the 15-year-old suspect's frustrations grew, he may have begun to feel as if there were no way out. His self-worth might have been tied to academic success and obedience to his parents' strict rules, both of which he was failing at. And in a moment of desperation, could this sense of failure have triggered an uncontrollable urge to lash out, to escape the suffocating grip of his family's expectations? The defense has suggested that the 15-year-old was in a state of emotional turmoil, possibly triggered by his school failures and the weight of his parents' disappointment. But what if the issue ran deeper? Was there a sense of rebellion growing inside the teenager, a desire to escape the confines of his home? And was this escalating conflict between the rigid expectations of his parents and his own desires a key factor in the massacre? In the weeks leading up to the tragedy, the Humiston family had become more and more isolated. The intense control exercised by Mark and Sarah over their children's lives meant that they rarely interacted with others outside the family circle. This kind of isolation, combined with the intense pressure placed on the 15-year-old, may have led to the kind of explosive event no one saw coming. At the heart of the question remains, could the brutal act of violence that claimed 5 lives have been the result of a momentary breakdown, the consequence of years of pressure and control finally boiling over? Was this a tragic outcome of a family structure that failed to account for the emotional and psychological needs of a growing teenager? As the investigation into the Lakefront family massacre unfolded, the King County Sheriff's Office began to meticulously comb through every piece of evidence, trying to uncover the truth hidden beneath the layers of mystery. The crime scene itself, a seemingly tranquil family home on Lake Alice, was soon transformed into a complex puzzle. Each clue, every detail, seemed to bring more questions than answers. The bodies of Mark, Sarah, and their 3 children, Benjamin, Joshua, and Catherine, were found scattered in various rooms of the home, each with gunshot wounds. The lack of blood spatter around the bodies suggested that the killings were methodical, precise. This raised immediate concerns about the nature of the crime. Was this the result of an outburst of rage, or was it something more deliberate, orchestrated by someone who had control over the situation? The 15-year-old suspect's 911 call had been the first critical piece of the puzzle. In a panicked voice, he claimed that his 13-year-old brother, Benjamin, had killed the family and then taken his own life. His words were chilling, but the police were immediately suspicious. Why would a teenager, especially one who had been home at the time, so calmly place the blame on his younger sibling? And why didn't the 15-year-old seem to be covered in blood if he had been so close to the violence? As investigators listened to the 911 recording, they noted the emotional distress in the suspect's voice, but they also began to wonder if this was a carefully constructed story. The defense team later pointed to this as evidence of the suspect's innocence, claiming that his statement in the 911 call was consistent with the forensic evidence. However, forensic experts would eventually cast doubt on this theory. Was the 15-year-old truly the innocent bystander he claimed to be? Or had he been involved in a far more calculated way than anyone had anticipated? Meanwhile, forensic experts began to analyze other elements of the crime scene. One of the most perplexing discoveries was a missing bottle of Clorox wipes. Initially, the prosecution suggested that this item was key to understanding the crime, as it might have been used in an attempt to clean up blood or other evidence. The prosecution also pointed to the fact that backpacks belonging to the victims had been opened or moved, raising suspicions that someone had tampered with the scene. But the defense team vehemently denied these allegations. Kristen Gestott, the suspect's attorney, argued that the claims of tampering were false and defamatory. She stated that there was no evidence to suggest that the crime scene had been altered after the fact. To the defense, these claims were a desperate attempt by the prosecution to muddy the waters and build a case that didn't exist. The more the investigators dug into the details, the more inconsistencies began to emerge. The initial 911 call placed by the suspect was full of contradictions. In his frantic report, he had said that Benjamin was the killer and that he had found the family members dead. But when police arrived, they found no trace of Benjamin. In fact, Benjamin's body was nowhere to be found, casting serious doubt on the suspect's story. Was Benjamin still alive, or had he been another victim of the crime? Forensic analysis of the suspect's clothing revealed a shocking detail: there was no blood on him. This posed another crucial question: how could someone so close to such a violent scene not have a single trace of blood on them? Could the 15-year-old have been lying about his involvement, or was there another explanation for the absence of physical evidence on his clothes? Despite the defense's insistence on their client's innocence, the contradictions kept mounting. Investigators discovered that the suspect's statement about his brother, Benjamin, seemed to conflict with evidence at the scene. Blood evidence and ballistic analysis would reveal that the shots fired didn't line up with the suspect's account of events. Could the 15-year-old have staged the crime in a way that made it appear as though his younger brother had committed the murders? Or was the suspect merely a frightened teen caught in the middle of an unimaginable tragedy? Even the surviving child, BAH, who had miraculously escaped through her bedroom window, couldn't provide a clear account of what had happened. In her state of shock, her version of events was fragmented and inconsistent, further complicating the investigation. As more pieces of the puzzle fell into place, the authorities began to realize that the truth was far more elusive than they had imagined. Was the 15-year-old suspect a cold-blooded killer, or was he just another victim of the horrific circumstances that unfolded that night? The investigation was far from over, and with each new discovery, the case seemed to grow even more complex. The investigation into the Lakefront family massacre has dragged on, revealing more twists and turns than anyone could have anticipated. What seemed like a straightforward case of a tragic family tragedy has spiraled into a legal battle full of uncertainty, doubt, and potential bombshells. As the days pass, the truth remains stubbornly elusive. The King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office found themselves at a crucial crossroads, whether to try the 15-year-old suspect as an adult. The gravity of the decision weighs heavily on the community, with legal experts debating whether the young boy, just 15 years old at the time of the killings, should face life in prison or receive the protections typically afforded to minors. His age complicates the case, but the nature of the crime, the brutal killings of 5 family members, pushes the prosecution to consider adult charges. If he is tried as an adult, he could face life in prison without the possibility of parole, a fate that now seems inevitable for someone facing 5 counts of first-degree murder. Meanwhile, the defense continues to deny any wrongdoing on the part of their client. Kristen Jestot, the suspect's attorney, stands firm in her belief that the 15-year-old was innocent, caught in the chaos of a horrific situation that he did not create. She argues that the state's evidence is circumstantial at best, and that her client's statement in the 911 call is consistent with the facts as they stand. But as more forensic evidence continues to surface, it becomes increasingly difficult to align this defense with the facts of the case. One of the most contentious issues that has emerged is the missing evidence from the crime scene. The defense maintains that the allegations of tampering are unfounded, yet forensic experts have found traces of blood that don't seem to match any of the family members who were killed. In addition, there have been questions raised about the location of the bodies. Why were some of the bodies moved, and why was the scene staged in such a deliberate way? The defense insists that these issues are a product of poor police work, while the prosecution believes they point to the suspect's calculated involvement. Despite these ongoing revelations, one thing remains clear: the question of what actually happened that night in the Humiston home has not yet been fully answered. Was this a crime of passion, born from the pressures of an overbearing household and a troubled teenager's breakdown? Or was there something darker at play, something more premeditated, that pushed a young mind to commit an act of violence so horrifying it shook the entire community to its core? And what of BAH, the 11-year-old survivor who managed to escape the massacre? Her testimony remains crucial in piecing together the true events of that night. She has spoken of playing dead and slipping out of her window, but details of what happened before she escaped are murky at best. Some have speculated that she may have seen things that would change the trajectory of the case. Could she have witnessed the crime firsthand, or was she in another room, unaware of the chaos unfolding just beyond her door? The possibility that the truth could lie in her memory adds another layer of tension to an already high-stakes case. As the legal battle intensifies and the case inches toward a potential trial, the question on everyone's mind remains: what truly happened that night in the Humiston home? The defense maintains that their client is innocent and that a great injustice has been done. But with the mounting evidence, the chilling nature of the crime, and the unresolved mysteries still hanging over the case, it's hard to ignore the growing sense of dread. Will the suspect stand trial for the mass murder of his own family, or is there a deeper story yet to be uncovered? And as the world watches, one thing is certain: the truth is still out there, waiting to be uncovered. For now, the case of the Lakefront family massacre remains shrouded in mystery, with new revelations surfacing almost daily, and the future of the suspect uncertain. As we wrap up today's deep dive into the Lakefront family massacre, one thing is clear: the mystery surrounding this case is far from over. The events of that night have left everyone asking the same questions. What drove a 15-year-old boy to allegedly kill his parents and siblings? Was he truly the one responsible, or could there be more to the story than we know? This is a case that will continue to unfold, with new revelations and twists likely to surface as the trial progresses. And as the suspect faces the possibility of being tried as an adult, the answers we're all searching for may finally come to light, or they could remain buried in the shadows. But we want to know, what do you think really happened that night in Lake Alice? Was the 15-year-old boy the killer, or was there someone else involved? Could it have been a crime of passion brought on by the immense pressure of his family's strict lifestyle, or is there a darker truth waiting to be uncovered? Leave your thoughts and theories in the comments below. We'd love to hear what you think about this shocking case and what direction you think it might go next. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button to stay updated on the latest developments. You won't want to miss the next chapter of this chilling story as it continues to unfold. If you found this deep dive into the Lakefront family massacre compelling, be sure to give the video a thumbs up and share it with your friends. There are more true crime stories like this one that we're working on, and we can't wait to share them with you. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time for another mysterious and gripping case.